Conjuring Last Rites. On September 5th.
I come down here, I need your help!
Hooray! Hooray! Hooray!
The Conjuring Last Rites. Only in theaters September 5th. Rated R.
If you spend enough time in one place, a town maybe, or a city, you start to hear things, stories, about things that happened to people there over the years. More than mere gossip. I'm talking about tales that have been passed around so often and embellished so much that they become the stuff of legend.
New York's capital region is full of these legends. Many of them center around Albany, stories of political intrigue and smoky back rooms usually, of titans like Roosevelt and Rockefeller, and of literal and figurative ghosts that walk the halls of the state capitol. But if you leave the city limits of Albany and travel east across the Hudson River to rural Rensselaer County, there's a true crime story that's been rattling around the hills there for generations. An unsolved murder, most foul.
Not everyone has heard of it, but if you're familiar with American pop culture, the plot may sound familiar. Very familiar.
It's a mystery that we here at the Times-Union have written about for more than a century, but we've never told it this way.
I'm Jessica Marshall.
And I'm Patrick Tyne.
This is The Girl in the Pond. This podcast is not about a ghost story.
But it starts with one.
The ghost story that we're starting with here comes from a guy that we are calling Nate. Nate's in his 40s. He's tall, with broad shoulders and a big voice. Athletic, a bit of a daredevil. But he's not necessarily the type of guy that you might think would tell you that one time he saw a ghost.
Navigating yourself down there once you get to the water, it's so raw. The rocks are so jagged. And it's just like it's crazy.
Patrick and I desperately wanted to hear his ghost story. Nate was game, and he suggested that we all meet up at his friend Todd's house. Todd lives in the small, rural hamlet of Post-and-Kill, New York. It's a one-stoplight town, about halfway between Albany and the Massachusetts border. It's pretty rural, a mix between rolling green meadows and heavy woods. Nate and Todd both grew up there. Patrick and I met Nate, Todd, and Nate's girlfriend Sierra there one day this past spring to hear his tale.
Yeah. So this is all your property?
Todd's
Nice.
property
How
is
many
pretty cool.
acres is it?
He lives in a Civil War era farmhouse that's right on the edge of Barberville Falls. That's a 92-foot waterfall. This is where Nate says he saw the ghost during a party a few years ago.
I didn't even think about that. You all right?
Yeah. Just watch once in a while.
You may happen to be wearing loafers and are not prepared for a hike.
Or heels, you know.
Yes. And they said, oh yeah, we definitely have to go down into the woods.
Right.
So we go down this very steep gravel road into just this, 100-foot tall trees as a canopy and rocks, and you are very much in the woods. And
Feels a little bit like Tolkien's Middle-earth.
Yes, and they brought that up. Like, this is like you could see just hobbits like jumping out, at any moment.
I was envisioning something a little darker than hobbits, but sure.
Maybe we were the hobbits on our adventure, and who knew what we were going to encounter. But
the ring wraiths.
Yes. But we end up in this kind of clearing on a rock, and this is definitely the place to hear the story that Nate is going to recount for us.
Nate's story takes place on a dark summer night in the early 2020s at a party in Todd's backyard.
Like Todd said, we were over here. It was a gathering. I was sitting by a fire. My buddy Scott was sitting directly to my right, maybe about as far as like I am from you. Mm-hmm. I had turned to my right, and I saw the face of a woman, a younger woman. She had kind of poked in like this, her
like
face.
This close.
Yes, like in my face, smiling, and I was like, just kind of like coursed through me. I looked and back, and she was gone.
Nate turned to his friend Scott, who was sitting right next to him.
Scott, did you see that by any chance? He's like, what? What do you mean, man? I'm like, nothing, I'm like, you didn't just see a woman sitting right here? He's like, he kind of looked back at me. Like, what the hell are you talking about, man?
Did he just see a ghost? Maybe it was just a trick of the light. He did his best to shake it off and turn his attention back to the party.
5 minutes later, our friend was walking, and she was coming up kind of like that area where that hill began, into that kind of social area, and there's a woman walking next to her who I literally thought was like, why is this woman dressed like this, kind of a thing, And she turns off and vanishes.
It was the same strange woman whose face that he had just seen, or thought he had seen.
She had a white shirt on, like a blousey shirt, a long black dress, and like what I thought at the time, only thing compared to was like a giant, like a middleweight belt or something like that you would win from like, I didn't really understand. It was like come to find out, it was like a female cummerbund, and she had a big wispy hat on, and she just went right up. It was pretty gnarly, and I go up to Bailey, and I'm like, the second time, I'm like, hey, Bailey, did you just have, I'm like, was someone just walking next to you? She's like, it's crazy you say that. She's like, I felt like something was right behind me. I'm like, now at this point, I was like, this is loco, It's pretty off the chains. I'd never seen.
Nate pulled everybody at the party. No one else had seen a woman dressed in old-timey clothing. Dude, what are you even talking about? He pulled out his phone and he called his girlfriend Sierra. He knew that at least she would believe that he saw something.
At the time.
When he called me at 3 a.m, going on and on about seeing a ghost, I started to look into the cemetery that's nearby.
One detail that we forgot to mention up front, Todd's property is across the street from a cemetery. One of those really old ones that you'll see dotting the rolling hillsides of New York and New England. You'll see gravestones there that date back to the Revolutionary War.
I was on the internet and I was looking at gravestones, just kind of glancing at names, and there are a few pictures in that grave site that are people are buried there, and I sent him one because I was like, oh, what about this? Because like what he described looked like this person.
One of them was a grainy, old-timey black and white photo of a young white woman. She was looking right at the camera. She had big round eyes and pouty lips. She had light hair that was swept expertly up into a pompadour. She actually looked like she could have been a classic 80s prom queen if she had lived in a different era. But she died in 1908. She was only 20. Sierra sent the link with that photo to Nate. When he opened it on his phone, the hairs stood up on the back of his neck. The apparition that he saw at the party looked an awful lot like this young woman. Her name was Hazel. Hazel Irene Drew.
She had like a very jokingly, like, kind of like,
I think the energy brought her and was like everyone having such a good time, and it's very close to the area.
She thinks that she was flirting with me. Did you say that at one point? Like that?
I joked, and he took it really seriously.
For weeks, it was all Nate could talk about. At that point, he now firmly believed that he had seen the ghost of a 20-year-old woman who died 120 years ago. It was Hazel Drew. It had to be. He was sure of it. One day, not long after his encounter, Nate got a call. It was from a local guy named Mark Marshall. No relation to me. Mark Marshall told Nate that he wanted to know more about that ghost girl that he saw.
He had called me up. He's like, what was she wearing? And I had explained it to him. He's like, that's literally what she was wearing the night. And he was saying something about the hat. I was like, I don't know. It was like a weird hat. And it ended up being, what would you call it? It was a peacock hat with peacock feathers with like garnet on it or something like that.
Yeah.
After hearing Nate's description, Mark Marshall also became convinced that it was the ghost of Hazel Drew. And then he revealed to Nate that he's been desperately trying to solve her murder.
We'll be right back.
The decisions made at the state capitol in New York impact all of us, from our property taxes to the cost of health care or our civil rights. It's all really complicated, but I'm here to help you sort through it. I'm Dan Clark, author of the Capitol Confidential newsletter from the Times-Union. Find that at capitalconfidential.com. That's capital with an O. capitalconfidential.com. See you there.
"12-year-old Jaliek Rainwalker vanished without a trace from a small upstate New York village on a cool November night in 2007. His adoptive parents say he ran away. Police believe he was murdered, but a body has never been found, and a suspect has never been named.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Yeah,
Appreciate
okay,
that.
all right, but you don't want to talk.
Then when I learned they were trying to undo the adoption, that's when I learned that this story was very complicated, well, a lot more complicated than I even thought.
Almost 2 decades later, the case remains unsolved. I'm Jessica Marshall.
And I'm Wendy Libertar.
In this podcast from the Times-Union, we take a deep dive into the mystery of this missing child and try to find some answers.
So have you come to terms that Jaliek is probably dead?
Yes. Okay.
I
I feel that he was killed on November 1st, 2007.
Available now, wherever you listen to podcasts.
If you're enjoying this podcast, take advantage of all the Times-Union has to offer and support our efforts to bring you award-winning journalism by becoming a Times-Union subscriber today. Go to timesunion.com/subscribe.
It's time for another ghost story. This one comes from a guy named Scott Frost. Scott's in his late 60s. He grew up in Los Angeles and Minnesota, but he spent many a childhood summer hanging out at his grandparents' house in upstate New York, specifically in a little town called Sand Lake, which is about 5 miles southwest from where Nate saw his ghost. After a very fruitful career across the country that we'll elaborate on in a minute, Scott moved to Sand Lake. To hear his ghost story, Jess and I went somewhere completely different, a busy coffee shop in the center of town.
What did you have for breakfast this morning?
Is this a test?
Yes.
I had granola that my wife makes.
Perfect.
And a smoothie.
Oh, that sounds delightful.
And coffee.
Over lattes with oat milk, Scott told us his tale. It goes back to the 1960s when he and his brother would visit their grandparents. They lived in an old house in Sand Lake, and they'd owned it since the 20s, right on Big Bowman Lake.
I don't know if you've been up on Big Bowman, but there's a windmill down at the end of the lake that actually was built by my great-grandfather, who was an engineer at RPI.
He's talking about Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, one of the oldest engineering schools in the country. It's in the upstate New York city of Troy, about 10 miles northwest of Sand Lake. We'll get to know Troy well over the course of this podcast. Scott's family originally settled in New York City in the early 1900s, but upstate life beckoned.
They started coming up to get away from the flu in the city during the summer, and they rented up there for a few years and then bought this house that had belonged to a rather strange farmer named Julius Rymiller, who there were stories that he could be seen crawling on the ceiling, that he was a witch.
That's not the ghost story.
But it is a deliciously creepy detail, isn't it?
Absolutely. The ghost story here is the one Scott's grandmother used to tell him and his brother, Mark, when they visited during the summer.
It had to do with sightings of a ghost by a farmer who one night was, I suppose, maybe had a little bit of moonshine and saw her ghost rising out of the pond.
Whose ghost, you ask?
Well, you didn't think we were telling random ghost stories for our own amusement, did you?
The ghost that Scott's grandmother said was seen to be rising from a pond was thought to be none other than the same ghost Nate thought he saw, Hazel Drew. Hazel Drew, according to Scott's grandmother, was a beautiful young woman who'd been brutally murdered in the woods near a farm and found floating in a pond. Teal's Pond. The killer was never found. Folks said her ghost roamed the pond at night.
Turned out, however, it actually wasn't a ghost. It was a white cow of his that had gotten stuck in the mud.
Regardless of this particular story being debunked, the ghost of a 20-year-old woman named Hazel Drew, it turns out, wasn't just a random story that Scott remembered from his childhood. Hazel Drew would come to play a pretty important role in Scott and Mark Frost's lives. The brothers grew up to become prolific Hollywood screenwriters. Mark Frost would become the co-creator, and Scott a writer, for one of the most famous American television shows ever made.
Diane, 11:30 a.m., February 24th. Entering the town of Twin Peaks. It's 5 miles south of the Canadian border, 12 miles west of the state line. Never seen so many trees in my life.
Have you ever seen Twin Peaks?
I watched the first season.
Let's talk about the plot of the pilot episode of Twin Peaks. What happens in that pilot? Do you remember?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean that's part I remember the most, because it's also, you remember that is like an hour and 20 minutes. It's like a feature length film to kind of start the incredible, baffling story that follows.
Coming Sunday, April 8th.
She's dead. Wrapped in plastic.
11:30 a.m., February 24th.
It starts with a young woman found dead at the water's edge.
She found my friend Laura lying face down on a rocky beach, completely naked. She'd been murdered.
Twin Peaks, a nice place to visit.
Twin Peaks premiered on ABC on April 8th, 1990. The pilot opens with the discovery of a body that washed ashore in a small northwest town. A murdered prom queen, Laura Palmer. The promotional image for the show features the now iconic high school senior portrait of Laura Palmer. She is a buxom beauty. Her head is tilted slightly, and she's looking directly at the camera. Her eyes are slightly turned down at the edges, eyebrows arched. Her lips are parted in a small smile that reveals perfect white teeth. Her chin ever so slightly dimpled. Her blonde hair is pulled into a perfectly poofy updo that curls around a sparkly silver crown. The embodiment of the 80s, like, popular girl prom queen. But then you kind of superimpose or juxtapose the image of Hazel Drew next to the image of Laura Palmer, but for some differences in maybe attire and style. You know, back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, nobody smiled in photos.
No.
So there's no smile. But like, you could almost convince yourself that they're identical.
Yes.
Which is just, fascinating to me, because it's clear that the story of Hazel Drew has played some inspiration here. Scott and his brother Mark, who partnered with Emmy and Oscar-nominated director David Lynch, have admitted that Hazel was an inspiration for the character and the setting of Twin Peaks.
It isn't specifically Hazel, but it's these woods that, even today, you can find some pretty rusticated people living up on the plateau. The postmistress was named Minnie Malkmus, who year-round wore galoshes all the time. They're just those kinds of people. So, which, sort of, you could extrapolate that, the log lady was kind of an extension of that.
One day, my log will have something to say about this.
The bespectacled middle-aged woman clutching a hunk of wood is another pop culture icon that came from Twin Peaks. She's played expertly by the late actress Catherine Coulson. Scott admits that neither he nor his brother knew specifics about the murder of Hazel Drew until more recently, when Mark Marshall knocked on his door in 2017. Mark told him he and the Sand Lake town historian were investigating the murder. They wanted to know what Scott knew about Hazel Drew. All Scott says he really knew was what he heard from his grandmother, that a girl was murdered at Teal's Pond and her ghost was said to haunt the land, hoping someone would avenge her death and find her killer.
You said at the beginning, you're like, I don't know if I know as much about the story of Hazel Drew as we do. But like, what you do know of it, like, what do you think of that story and, what you've learned about it?
So ultimately it's just bloody sad, that this poor girl was, whatever happened to her, I think she was bludgeoned and thrown in the pond, or, it makes for great fiction. It's compelling. People love mysteries. And at its best, Twin Peaks was a mystery. That also opened the kind of doors for a certain amount of creative thinking that I think followed for a lot of other people.
After a long stint as a Hollywood screenwriter, including 2 episode credits on Twin Peaks, Scott Frost transitioned to crime novels. He's written a 9-book thriller series about a fictional female homicide detective named Alex DeLillo. He also wrote the autobiography of FBI agent Dale Cooper, the fictional hero of Twin Peaks, played by actor Kyle MacLachlan.
Can I pick your brain as a crime novelist with regard to this story here? You know, because you've written about murder, you've written about, the investigation of murder, I'm assuming. And I know you don't know as much about this case specifically, but, from what you know about it, if you were writing this as a story, like, who would the killer be? Like, who would you make the killer out to be?
Well, there's the character that would make it a bigger book, and then there's the character that would make the most sense.
Okay.
Yeah. So the most sense would probably be either the wealthy guy who was using her and realized it was going to fuck up his life and killed her. Or there's the half-witted farmer's son who has an encounter and, almost like Of Mice and Men, sort of that kind of a character.
Yeah.
And then there's my grandmother's version, which is Legs Diamond, So there's 3 distinct different stories there.
I gotta find out where Legs Diamond was on July 7th, 1908.
We need an alibi.
I'm going to jump in for a second and say Legs Diamond was a notorious bootlegger who ran up and down New York's Hudson Valley during the Prohibition era. But he was only 9 when Hazel Drew was murdered, and he was living in Philadelphia. I'm not a detective, but I'm going to rule him out as a suspect here.
One of these people murdered Laura Palmer. It was a mystery that captured the imagination of the whole country. Tonight, the killer will finally be revealed. Really.
I am just so happy.
Twin Peaks next.
Turns out, in July of 1908, a little more than 80 years before the country became obsessed with the question of who killed Laura Palmer, we were hooked on another mystery. Who killed Hazel Drew? Now, the ghost stories that we just heard inspired us to do a little digging. Hazel Drew had been a household name for a brief period of time after her murder. Everyone was fixated on who killed her. We found out who killed Laura Palmer at the end of season 1 of Twin Peaks. But the world actually never found out who killed Hazel Drew. I have my own ghost story to add to the 2 that we have just heard in this episode.
I'm excited.
We went out and we recorded with all of these folks, and part of what I do once we are done recording is I pull all of that audio onto my computer, I go through it, I transcribe it, I listen to it, and I put it together in what you are hearing now. And I was doing that. I was actually putting together the part specifically where Nate talks about seeing the face of the ghost. And while I do that, sometimes because this is the way my brain works, I have something going on the side, right? Something to do with my fingers or something to do with my brain that kind of helps me focus in my weird neurodivergent way. And that today happens to be Squirtle. Have you ever heard of Squirtle?
I have not.
So it is one of those daily games that you play on your phone. It's kind of like Boggle, actually. Boggle is the best parallel to this game. Basically, you get a square set of letters, and you have to make words out of all of the letters. And you can go diagonally, you can go up and down, you can go, around and around. And, the idea is you get all of the words that you possibly can out of this set of letters. And so I have that going to the side of where I'm editing on my computer, and I'm listening to the story that Nate is telling, and I'm going through and I'm looking for words, and all of a sudden I find the word Hazel. While I'm listening to this ghost story. Okay, that can't be a coincidence, right? Like, that is too much of a coincidence. And then I keep going, and then I find the word seance. Like I told you, I don't really believe in the supernatural, but how is that a coincidence?
I don't know either. I mean, it kind of brought the newsroom to a halt there for a minute. Was there a third word?
The third word was cease. And I don't know what that means. I feel like I was using a Ouija board.
I don't want to curse the podcast, but are we getting some sort of instruction to? I mean, it's too late now. We've done so much research and so many interviews that.
You know what I think it was? I think it was an instruction, A, to have a seance, which I'm not sure I'm on board for, but B, also to stop what you're doing right now and redo it a different way because it sounds like crap. So here we are in the studio re-recording some stuff. That's what I'm going to take it to me.
Exactly.
Unless I get further messages from my daily Squirtle games. So that happened, and I'm thoroughly freaked out.
Well, keep me updated on other, if this is a daily thing, maybe this is the opening of a new channel of dialogue with somebody that we would love to hear from for this podcast.
Is this the way we get an interview with Hazel?
It might be the only way. She still looms. The ghost, like, people are still telling the stories. People are still getting weird vibes in the areas she haunted. I mean, and I mean haunt is in like her haunts.
Her haunts, physical haunts, yeah.
She is to some degree with us. She's with us in the
editing bay?
Yeah, in the editing bay, in the newsroom, in your phone.
On TV.
And the fact that there are people that want to talk about her. Any project takes a certain amount of like prodding and research and making the initial phone calls, and those are always kind of difficult. But once you get the ball rolling there, you come to realize that there are a lot of people that want to talk about her, and a lot of people that want to talk about her that live in and around the areas that she haunted, her haunts.
We may have started this podcast with ghost stories, but The Girl in the Pond is going to be a biography, a history, an ensemble, a mystery.
Here's where we're going with this. We're going to find out who Hazel was, who she knew,
what happened to her, and why people are still talking about it today.
Hazel Drew was a real person, and everything that's unknowable about her ghost, we do know things about her life and the people that she associated with and the world that she inhabited.
That's next time on The Girl in the Pond.
Tis the last rose of summer left blooming alone. All her lovely companions are faded and gone.
The Girl in the Pond is a production of the Times Union. It's produced by Jessica Marshall and Patrick Tyne. Written and edited by Jessica Marshall. Editorial direction and fact-checking by Erica Smith. Production help from Daniel Roberts, Sarah Diodato, and Mike Goodwin. Our theme song is The Last Rose of Summer, written by Thomas Moore. Musical arrangement by Matthew A. Streifert. Vocals by Josephine Diodato. Additional music by Isabelle Fortier and Francois Couture via Getty Images.
I'll not leave thee, thy lone one, to pine on the stem, since the lovely are sleeping. Go sleep thou with them. Thus kindly I scatter thy leaves o'er the bed, where thy maids of the garden lie scentless and dead.
As we roll out this podcast, we want to hear from you. What do you think of the story? What questions do you have? Email us at podcast@timesunion.com.
Starting a business can seem like a daunting task, unless you have a partner like Shopify. They have the tools you need to start and grow your business. From designing a website to marketing to selling and beyond, Shopify can help with everything you need. There's a reason millions of companies like Mattel, Heinz, and Allbirds continue to trust and use them. With Shopify on your side, turn your big business idea into... Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/special offer.